Some weapons are legends because of their sheer power. Others for design that just changed everything. But today we're talking about a firearm that kind of became a hero by accident. It was a lightweight little rifle, really born out of desperation, that went on to arm millions. This is the amazing story of the M1 Carbine. So let's just jump right in with a question. What on earth does a paratrooper, leaping out of a plane, have in common with a guy crammed inside a Sherman tank or a soldier who's got to lug around a giant rocket launcher? I mean, on the surface, their jobs couldn't be more different, right? But as World War II was kicking off, they all shared one very dangerous problem. And the answer is, they were all stuck. They needed something with more punch than a pistol, for sure, but way less clunky than a full-sized battle rifle. They needed a weapon that, simply wasn't in the U.S. Army's arsenal. And that gap, that empty space, set the stage for one of the most remarkable development stories in military history. So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the problem itself, the rifle that wasn't. Then, we'll meet the surprise winner of the design competition in an unlikely champion. After that, we'll see how it actually performed in the hands of a GI. We'll follow its journey beyond the battlefield, and finally, we'll see how it became an American icon. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's the late 1930s, the world is just sliding into chaos, and the U.S. Army is having this big uh-oh moment. They're realizing that this new kind of mechanized warfare creates a huge problem for a ton of their soldiers. And this right here was the dilemma. This was the rock and the hard place. On one side, you have the incredible M1 Garand. I mean, what a rifle. Powerful, accurate, but also really long, really heavy, and just a massive pain for anyone who wasn't a frontline infantryman. On the other side, the trusty M1911 pistol. A great sidearm, no doubt, but it was a last resort weapon, only good at spitting distance. And millions of support troops, we're talking truck drivers, medics, artillery crews, they had absolutely nothing in between. So the Army knew they needed something, and they needed it yesterday. They put out a call for a new light rifle. And the design that ended up winning came from a place nobody expected, and in a time frame that just seemed impossible. Just look at this timeline. It really shows you how desperate the situation was. A team over at Winchester, led by a designer who, and you can't make this up, was fresh out of prison, took a basic idea and turned it into a working prototype in just 13 days. 13! I mean, that is an absolutely astonishing feat of engineering. This wasn't some years-long, careful development cycle. This was a flat-out, desperate sprint. But, it wasn't an easy sell. The carbine fired this brand-new .30 carbine cartridge, and it was basically a beefed-up pistol round, not a full-power rifle round like the Garand used. So a lot of the top brass, the guys on the ordnance board, they were skeptical. They thought it was a pipsqueak, underpowered, a compromise. But then, in the trials, it proved it was light, it was handy, it was reliable. The underdog had won. So the design gets the green light, and the factories just start churning these things out at an incredible rate. And now the real test was about to begin, as the M1 Carbine was shipped out to every single theater of the war. And let this number just sink in for a second. Over 6.1 million M1 Carbines were made during World War II. Think about that. That's more than any other American rifle or pistol, more than even the legendary M1 Garand. This thing wasn't some niche weapon. It became one of the most common sights on the battlefield. So who was carrying all these millions of carbines? Well, it was exactly the people it was built for. Officers who needed something lighter than a Garand, paratroopers who needed a compact weapon for the jump, and all those support troops, the tank crews, the radio men, the bazooka teams, who finally had a weapon that gave them some real defensive firepower without weighing them down. Okay, so this brings us to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? The weapon was a logistical masterpiece, sure, but what did the soldiers who actually use it think? Did it get the job done when their lives were on the line? Well, the answer, like it so often is in war, is it's complicated. Yeah, the feedback from the front was really a mixed bag. On the one hand, soldiers absolutely loved how light and easy it was to carry. It had great capacity with a 15 or 30 round magazine, and the low recoil made it a breeze to shoot. But there was that one persistent complaint you heard over and over: stopping power. And here's the really crucial insight. This whole debate wasn't just about the carbine. It was actually a preview of a huge shift in military thinking. See, that .30 carbine round was an early version of what we now call an intermediate cartridge. More powerful than a pistol round, but less than a full-size rifle round. It was all a trade-off. You gave up some long-range power for a much lighter weapon and the ability to carry a ton more ammo. That very idea would go on to define assault rifles for the rest of the century. But listen, the story doesn't just stop when Japan surrenders in 1945, not by a long shot. The M1 Carbine's amazing combination of lightweight and decent firepower made it incredibly popular all over the world for decades to come. It saw major action all over again with U.S. troops in Korea and was carried by the very first advisors in Vietnam. But its reach was just global. It became a standard issue weapon for the Israeli Defense Forces in their early days. It armed the South Korean army for decades and was even used by police forces in West Germany. The little rifle that could just kept on going. And that brings us to its final chapter. After its long military life, the M1 Carbine finally came home. And that's where it made the jump from being a tool of war to a true piece of American culture. I mean, its post-war legacy is just so diverse. Millions were sold as military surplus. They became these beloved sporting and ranch rifles for the exact same reasons the GIs liked them. They were light, handy, and just plain fun to shoot. It armed police departments for years. And of course, it became a familiar sight in movies and TV, really cementing its place in our collective memory. So, what's the final verdict here? Was the M1 Carbine just a quick and dirty wartime compromise? Or was it a revolutionary design, way ahead of its time, that actually predicted the future of firearms? You know, the most fascinating thing about this unlikely hero is that the answer is yes. It was both. It was exactly the right weapon at exactly the right time for millions of soldiers. And its incredible story is this powerful reminder that sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. You know, some tools, they just become legends. For America in the 20th century, one of those legends was a rifle. But the M1 Garand wasn't just a piece of wood and steel. It was a symbol of American ingenuity, our industrial might, and really the story of the soldiers who carried it into history. Let's just start with some seriously high praise. When a guy like General George S. Patton, who was not exactly known for pulling his punches, calls something the greatest battle implement ever devised, well, that's something you've got to pay attention to. That one quote tells you almost everything you need to know about the M1's impact. So, that's the big question, right? What made this rifle so special? It wasn't just one thing. It was this perfect storm of brilliant engineering, battlefield psychology, and just being the exact right tool for the soldiers who needed it most. All right, so first up, let's talk about the mechanics, because to really get why the M1 was such a massive leap forward, you have to understand what the average soldier was using before it came along. Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. Just look at the raw numbers here. Put yourself in a soldier's boots for a second. While your opponent has to manually work a bolt after every single shot, clack, clack, you can send 8 aimed semi-automatic rounds downrange as fast as you can pull the trigger. That is a truly game-changing advantage in firepower. And the absolute genius at the heart of the system was one incredible invention, the N-block clip. Don't think of it like a modern magazine you swap out. It was more like this preloaded package of 8 rounds that you just shove right into the rifle. This made reloading unbelievably fast, especially under pressure. And check out how this actually works on the ground. The last round fires, the empty clip automatically flies out with that famous ping, and the rifle is wide open, ready for a fresh clip to be pushed straight in. The whole thing is simple, it's fast, and in the chaos of battle, it was a total lifesaver. Okay, so was the system perfect? Not quite. There was a trade-off. You couldn't just top off a clip that was only half empty. You either had to fire all 8 rounds or manually eject a clip with ammo still in it. But let's be real. On the battlefield, the massive advantage of that lightning-fast, full reload almost always won the day. But look, a weapon isn't just a machine, right? It's about the person holding it. So let's shift gears from the hardware to the human element, to the soldier carrying this rifle. Because honestly, its biggest impact might have been psychological. And you hear this again and again. I mean, constantly, when you read veteran accounts. Just carrying the M1 gave American GIs this incredible confidence. They knew, deep down, they had a tool that was reliable, accurate, and could simply outperform the standard rifles their enemies were using. You just can't overstate how important that mental edge is. You know, the Army couldn't just hand this rifle out and call it a day. They had to completely change how they trained soldiers to take advantage of it. It wasn't just about hitting a bullseye anymore. The new focus was on ammunition discipline, making every one of those 8 shots count, and engaging multiple targets quickly, something that was only possible because of that semi-auto action. And of course, the elite units, from the Rangers to the Airborne, absolutely trusted it on their most dangerous missions. And this, right here, this is the heart of it. Soldiers didn't just carry the M1, they really formed a bond with it. They learned its weight, its balance, its unique feel. It was the one piece of gear they could trust, without question, to work when everything else was literally falling apart around them. All right, now you know with any legend, a few myths are going to pop up. It's just inevitable. So let's take a minute and do some myth busting, separating the battlefield fact from the fiction. Okay, this is the big one, the one everyone brings up, the famous ping. The idea that the sound of that little metal clip getting ejected was like a dinner bell for the enemy, shouting, "Hey, this American soldier is out of ammo and vulnerable." The reality? Well, the guys who were actually there will tell you it was a total non-issue. Seriously, imagine the absolute chaos of a real firefight. Artillery, machine guns, people yelling. The tiny ping of a clip hitting the ground was completely drowned out. Plus, you're in a squad. Not everybody is reloading at the exact same second. And hey, while we're at it, let's just knock out a few other myths real quick. Was it prone to jamming? Nope. In fact, it was famous for its reliability if you kept it clean. Was it difficult to reload? Not a chance. With a little practice, it was way faster than a bolt action. Too much recoil? Actually, the rifle was so heavy that its weight and gas system soaked up a lot of that kick, making it surprisingly manageable. So, now that we've separated fact from fiction, what's the real story? What's the M1's lasting legacy? Let's take a look at its undeniable place in history. I mean, just stop and think about that number for a second. Over 4 million just during World War II. This wasn't just a rifle. It was a roaring symbol of America's industrial might, our ability to put the best possible tool into the hands of our soldiers on an absolutely massive scale. And its story didn't just end in 1945, not even close. This thing was the main U.S. service rifle all the way through the Korean War, and it kept on serving with our allies in conflicts around the world for decades after that. That is a truly remarkable record of service. And this is what's so cool to me. The M1 is basically the peak, the absolute pinnacle of a whole way of thinking about rifles, the powerful, long-range, full-power battle rifle. The weapons that came after it, like the M16, were part of a totally different philosophy. Lighter rifles, smaller bullets, more ammo, designed for a different kind of war. The Garand wasn't obsolete. It was just the perfection of an era. And believe it or not, this story is still being written today. The M1 is way more than just a museum piece. Thanks to the civilian marksmanship program, thousands of everyday Americans have been able to own, care for, and shoot these incredible pieces of history, keeping their legacy alive on firing ranges all across the country. And we can't wrap this up without talking about the man who started it all, John Garand. He was a humble employee at a government armory who never got rich from his invention. His reward wasn't royalties. It was knowing that his genius created a tool that helped millions of soldiers do their duty and, most importantly, come home. Which really leaves us with one final thought. The M1 Garand earned its legendary status by performing under the most extreme pressure you can possibly imagine. It really makes you wonder, what tool from our time, what piece of modern technology that we rely on today will people still be talking about with this same kind of respect 80 years from now?
So why was this old World War I relic even on the battlefield in World War II? I mean, it's a good question, right? Because when you picture a GI from that era, you're thinking of the M1 Garand, for sure. And yeah, that's mostly true. But the real story, it's a lot more complicated. So how did this old-timer stick around? Let's dig in.
All right, so to really get why this rifle made such a comeback, we got to go back in time. We need to understand why it was considered a legend in the first place. This thing's story starts way, way before World War II ever kicked off for the U.S.
So picture this. It's 1903. The U.S. Army adopts this rifle, the Springfield, and man, it quickly earns its reputation. This is the rifle the American doughboys carried through the trenches of World War I, and its legend only got bigger after the war. Competitive marksmen, they loved this thing. Why? Simple. It was just unbelievably accurate and as reliable as the day is long.
Okay, so what is a bolt-action rifle anyway? Well, with the M1903, after you fire a shot, you have to manually, physically, work a bolt to kick out the old shell and load in a new round. Yeah, It's slower than what came next. But that super simple, super robust design, that's the secret sauce. That's what made it so incredibly dependable and accurate. I mean, fewer moving parts, right? Less stuff to break.
Okay, so the Springfield is this respected, legendary rifle, a real veteran. But you know how it goes? Technology never stops. And in the 1930s, something totally new, something revolutionary shows up, and it was designed to send the old Springfield straight into retirement.
And this is it, the M1 Garand. In 1936, the U.S. Army makes it official. You know, the famous General Patton, he would eventually call it the greatest battle implement ever devised. And he wasn't kidding. This wasn't just a small step up. It was a complete game changer for the average soldier. And the difference between these two, I mean, it was night and day. You've got the old Springfield, bolt action. You can load 5 rounds. Then you've got the new Garand. It's semi-automatic. That means no more working the bolt by hand. You just pull the trigger again and again. Plus, it held 8 rounds in that famous clip. You know, the one that makes that ping sound everyone knows. The Garand meant a single soldier could fire way, way faster. And really, that should have been it. End of story for the Springfield, right?
Well, history had a major plot twist in store. Just as the old M1903s were being packed up, put into storage, and pretty much forgotten, the entire world just exploded into chaos. And the United States was about to get pulled into the biggest fight it had ever seen.
December 7th, 1941, a date that lives in infamy, the attack on Pearl Harbor. Just like that, America, which had been trying to stay out of it, is thrown headfirst into a war spanning the entire globe. The country literally went from a peacetime mindset to all-out war in a single day.
And what does that mean? It means you have to build an army, a massive army, on a scale that was just unimaginable before. We're talking millions and millions of Americans being drafted or volunteering. And every single one of those new soldiers, they needed a rifle.
And here is the massive, massive problem. Even though the Army had adopted the super advanced M1 Garand 5 years before, production had been, well, slow. So when Pearl Harbor happened, the U.S. only had about 50,000 of them ready to go. 50,000? For an army of millions, that's just not enough. It's a crisis.
So, put yourself in their shoes for a second. You're suddenly at war. You have literally millions of soldiers you need to arm and train like yesterday. But you are desperately short on your main, modern rifle. What on earth do you do? It's a logistical nightmare of epic proportions.
The answer, the solution to this huge modern industrial problem, was sitting quietly, gathering dust in armories all across the country. It was that reliable, old-school veteran, the M1903 Springfield.
So, the Springfield was pulled out of retirement and given 3 critical new jobs. Job number 1, training. It was the perfect rifle for millions of new GIs to learn the absolute fundamentals of marksmanship. It was simple and reliable. Job number 2, arming our allies. Through the Lend-Lease program, thousands of these were shipped out to forces like the Free French and the Chinese. And job number 3, and this is a big one, sniping. Because of that legendary accuracy, you slap a scope on an M1903 and you've got the best American sniper rifle of the entire war. It served with deadly precision from the fields of Europe to the islands of the Pacific.
Now check this out. This wasn't just a matter of, hey, let's use up the old ones we have lying around. No way. The demand was so huge, so urgent, that American factories had to actually restart production of the M1903. Can you believe that? They had to fire up the old assembly lines for a rifle that was officially obsolete, all to meet this critical need.
So what's the big takeaway here? The M1903 Springfield wasn't just some temporary fix, not just a stopgap. Its service in World War II really cemented its place in history. And, you know, it teaches us a really powerful lesson about war and about technology itself. When you look at the whole picture, the M1903 did so much more than just plug a hole. It made it possible to train that massive new army, it armed our allies and our own support troops while the factories were racing to build more Garands, and it was, without a doubt, the superior tool for the job of precision shooting. It really became this incredible symbol of American ingenuity, the ability to adapt and use every single thing you've got to get the job done.
And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? In a war that we remember for jet engines and early computers and even the atomic bomb, one of the most vital pieces of gear was a rifle designed 40 years earlier. It just goes to show you that when things get really serious, brand new and cutting edge aren't always what wins. Sometimes the most important feature is that it just plain works.